Hey guys, we're back with another coaching video. Per usual, we're going to find ourselves on the Brewmaster Monk back in a freehold. This seems to be a pretty common trend or theme, but we're going to just dive right in. We're going to do exactly what we've done before. We're going to look over like talents, we're going to look over gear, and then of course the run. Now, I'm going to just preface by saying that this was recorded a couple weeks ago now. I've been putting this video off for a while, mostly because I didn't want to repeat content, mostly because I've just been reviewing tank freehold runs. Also, I've been super busy, starting a new job soon. Family stuff has come up, just been pretty busy all around. But with this being from the last patch, there are some kind of changes that have kind of sprung up into the meta. So when you're looking at the talent build, keep in mind that this is the old tree and most of the choices that were made in here made a lot of sense. So jumping right into just gear and build, this is a player on Ezrealon named Bruce Lee. He also has a YouTube channel. You can check it out at SeveroGames. The link for this video, not this video, but like the run itself, can be found there. And he also posts a ton of other runs from the Brewmaster's point of view. So if you're looking to kind of gather more data and watch more people run, go check it out. So in terms of this run specifically, now again, a lot of the gearing has changed since. The two embellishments that he is actually running is going to be the Spore Cloak and the Potion Inhibitor on his weapon. Problem with this is that I think 20 is getting to that point where it's still, I think, too low of a level to actually justify running Spore Cloak. Now, again, if you want to and you feel like you either don't have good tank trinkets or you're just, again, a Brewmaster playing on a Fort week and you feel like you need that extra defensive, the Spore Cloak will make up roughly about 7% of your healing. And if you ever dip below that threshold, right, it's going to give you a nice absorb as like a little pseudo cheat death, I guess, similar to like things like Will of the Necropolis. The Potion Inhibitor also not a bad embellishment, but it was extremely strong in season 1 when Shocking Disclosure and other potions were really powerful. Since then they've been nerfed, and other embellishments have kind of shown up to be a little bit more prominent in the meta. So if you are running Potion Inhibitor, you basically want to make sure you're using potions on cooldown as soon as they come up, pretty much, and making sure you're kind of routing around that. With the damage and, tanking profile of the Brewmaster specifically, you would typically see a use of Shocking Disclosure, and that would net you a good bit of damage in that pull. But again, it's more suited for uncapped AoE, and that's when you saw this being used in like things like Algothar Academy from last season. But a lot of dungeons this season don't have surprisingly big pulls outside of maybe Brackenhide and arguably Freehold. If you are running this embellishment, just make sure you're using potions on CD. In terms of talents, let's open this up. Freehold is not typically a dungeon where you would run Hasty Provocation in. There aren't a lot of times where you need to like speed taunt a mob out of something or to reposition it. You can easily drop this for something like Close to Heart, for example. You could also drop it for a second stack of Bounce Back. While Bounce Back is kind of nuanced in very specific encounters and doesn't net you a whole lot over the course of a run, certain things like the Knuckle Dusters do a ton of damage. The Enforcers do a ton of damage. So later in the dungeon, Bounce Back becomes relatively practical in this dungeon, but you're already running one stack of it, so you could go Close to Heart, and then maybe you could drop Detox as well for Close to Heart. This increasing the healing taking from all sources as well as your group is just really strong. But Detox is a fine take in this dungeon because you have some of the earlier poisons that get, or diseases that get applied to the tank that reduce their healing taken. But if you're running with a healer who can dispel that or another DPS who can dispel that, that's also an alternative. But that's kind of the big one in the class tree. Now looking at the spec tree, the only thing that really stands out is Determination. Now this increases Stagger's effectiveness, but Stagger is already extremely effective and there's a better way to spend this point. Unfortunately, Fortifying Brew is just so bad. Like, it's such a bad cooldown. Max health and a little bit of DR on a 6-minute CD. You obviously are reducing it by 2 minutes and then you're playing it to increase Stagger's effectiveness. You're probably going to get more use out of High Tolerance in any kind of given setting, or even just playing into Bone Dust Brew. The rest of this is fine. As well, during this run, keep in mind that like these two talents used to be swapped around. So you were playing Counter-Strike or Facepalm into Counter-Strike. Nowadays, you can actually just drop Facepalm if you wanted that extra like survivability, so you can play something like this. The last thing I want to mention was Bob and Weave versus Black Ox Brew. You were running Black Ox Brew, but throughout the course of the run, you used it like a handful of times, maybe. And the times that you did end up using it weren't like the most efficient use of it. So if you're going to run Black Ox Brew, arguably you want to use it more than just once or twice. You want to actually be using it fairly regularly. If you feel like you're sturdy enough, or once you get comfortable in a key and you don't feel like you need that extra cooldown, you can easily change to bob and weave. These typically over the course of the run will net you a similar damage reduction amount. Just one is passive and one is active. And those active ones can be used on those scary pulls where you're pulling multiple knuckle dusters, like a crusher, specific boss fights, whatever it might be. And then you run bob and weave if you just don't feel like you're ever going to have a pull where you're going to need that extra use of a cooldown. Outside of that, for 10.1, this was a fine talent build. What I recommend now is obviously dropping Fort here. You can play bob and weave. This is optional. And then what a lot of players you're seeing is they're playing either Bone Dust Brew here, and you can do that by dropping like things like Pretense. You can drop Facepalm if you need more defensive value in a dungeon like Freehold. You can drop it for Pretense instead of playing Facepalm, because Facepalm is more or less a damage talent now. I recommend playing Press the Advantage. It's a lot more fun, but if you like Weapons of Order, that's fine. And then what most players are doing is they're playing Training. So you're seeing a build that looks a little bit more like this. Because of Press the Advantage, if you're playing this, you're going to frequently lower the cooldown on Celestial Brew to the point where light brewing is just like overkill at that point. So you can either play Training, or you can drop this node altogether and you can play Facepalm if you're doing a low enough key where you feel like you're not going to be frequently in high stagger, gaining that maximum amount of mastery that you're going to get in this dungeon. All right, that was a lot of information. Going through the entire run, this one's going to be a little bit shorter because for the most part, most of your gameplay throughout this run was actually pretty okay. Fundamentally, your rotation is, you know, accuracy is probably like 95%. There's a couple of things throughout the run, like with Rushing Jade Wind and Charred Passions, that it might have fallen off here or there. But for the most part, the thing that kind of stood out to me were there were certain portions of the instance where your opener was strange with how you were pulling with Keg Smash versus like making sure you were at least maintaining Charred Passions. I'll go over that in a second, as well as your use of defensives, things like Dampen Harm, Black Ox Brew, stuff like that. So let's take a look at this first pull. Now, what's really strange is like the way you open with this pull, you Keg Smash, Spinning Crane Kick, Keg Smash. While Keg Smash is your hardest hitting ability, it doesn't mean you necessarily want to pull with it, because you want to make sure you're applying that Keg Smash debuff to all the targets. So it was a little strange at the start. If you are going to just Keg Smash, like you're going to just try to like pull with Keg Smash and Spinning Crane Kick, you want to at least make sure you're getting Charred Passions up first. And what you can do, this is kind of more of a nuanced tip. I don't recommend this to new players, but if you're looking to get more damage on pull and you want to pull with Spinning Crane Kick instead, because there's a lot of like, the mob density isn't like super tight. For example, this first pull, you're pulling 3 packs together. You can Rushing Jade Wind right before pulling, Breath of Fire, and then you can Keg Smash, Spinning, Keg Smash, Spinning, and while you're doing that, you already have those debuffs up. So you already have Charred Passions, and you already have Spinning Crane Kick, or not Spinning Crane Kick, Rushing Jade Wind. So your damage is going to be very, very high. So it was just a little strange. Now, I do suggest using Dampen Harm to help ease your stagger and damage intake at the start of this pull, because you are running around, you're grouping stuff up, and your globals are important. Dampen Harm is off the global. It's going to reduce all of the damage you're going to be taking from 20 to 50% depending on the size of the hit. So all around, good defensive to start with. The reason I suggest this is because you ended up committing Celestial Brew extremely early in this pull. You don't really want to do that. Your healer is going to be able to burst a little bit. Dampen Harm should at least allow you to build up Purified Cheese stacks, because if you're Celestial Brewing right away, your Celestial Brew is going to be very weak. It's going to go away, and then you're now kind of playing this game of catch up, where you're now trying to get your Celestial Brew off of CD instead of having it available in your back pocket when you need it. You did use Fort Brew here, which is good, but again, try using it as soon as you pull. You don't have to commit both Fort and Dampen, but you can pick and choose basically. So if you're going to open with Fort Brew, do it at the start of the pull, and then after, right before it's about to fade, that's maybe when you might want to follow up with Dampen. A good way to think about this as well is this is a massive pull. It's 9 targets, some hard-hitting mobs. Your healer's gonna be busy in certain situations. So you want to think like, okay, this is a big pull. My healer might be busy, and it's like, obviously, like there's a lot of group damage as well. And the next pull is only going to be 4 mobs. So I can commit a lot of my CDs here. I don't really need CDs for that next pull, and then I'll have them up for the pull following. So it's kind of like this kind of give and trade, like leapfrog style of defensive usage. The only major mistake that I kind of noticed in this pull, outside of like the opener, was you did like back-to-back hex smashes right after popping of Weapons of Order. This is going to most likely put you behind on Charred Passions and make that window extremely tight. So you want to make sure you're doing Keg Smash, Breath, Keg Smash, and then you can go into a Spinning Crane Kick. And then you have a banked Breath of Fire available. The only thing I can suggest in terms of positioning, or I guess mob placement, is that this crack shot that you pulled missed out on a lot of damage because it wasn't stacked in the group. You can use LOS to line of sight that mob around the stairs, so it actually forces it into melee. So what you'll see a lot of tanks do is they play this like little line of sight game by bouncing to either side of the stairs. All right, so pull number 2, make sure you're using Rushing Jade Wind first and then Keg Smashing into a Breath of Fire. This will allow you to at least generate some threat. This Ellie Shaman ended up dying to Ripping Threat. Though, to be fair, he did use like Chain Lightning or Stormkeeper or something, so that's kind of on him, but make sure you're establishing enough threat before you line of sight. This third pull, nothing really major to note, outside of like, you did let Rushing Jade Wind fall off and Charred Passions fall off like briefly here. And then also at this point in the run, you haven't used Dampen Harm yet. I'm not sure why you're sitting on it, but it's a very, very strong cooldown. I think out of all of the defensive buttons in the Brewmaster's kit, Dampen Harm has to be one of your strongest CDs, mostly because it can mitigate so much damage over its 10-second duration. All right, so that was the start of the run. Shortly after you guys like killed the first boss and did the first bridge, you guys did this in pull. You pulled with Provoke, I don't recommend doing that. And the reason why is because if you happen to pull a mob who wasn't within your Keg Smash range and didn't get hit by that, or if your DPS decides to burst on something that also didn't get hit, or a mob gets chained in, you then won't have Provoke available to quickly get threat off. For the most part, I never recommend pulling with Provoke unless you absolutely need to. Typically the best thing to pull from like range is going to be obviously Keg Smash if you're within range. You also have Chi Wave and Crackling Jade Lightning. All three of these are going to allow you to tag in mobs or pull mobs without having to waste your Provoke. You're going to get to experience this on the next pull with the Brine Scale. Also, be careful about being near the edge here. As you found out, you can actually get knocked down below if you get knocked up at a weird angle. Once again, like I said before, you pulled with Provoke and then you didn't have it for this Brine Scale. During the Council of Captain fights, you have a Paladin in the group who can use Freedom, but just in case you aren't aware, you can actually use Tiger's Lust to remove the Blackout Barrel from party members. And this is really important during certain overlaps with the Grapple Shot, or Grape Shot? Yeah, Grape Shot. Also, be sure not to stand in these green swirls on the ground. They do damage to both enemies and to players hit. The big pull in this dungeon that I want to talk about here is this pull. This was really aggressive, and notice here how you don't have like any cooldowns available. You used Dampen Harm really early on with the use of Diffuse Magic as well, and then you died without using Health Pot, Health Stones, and you had access to Ring of Peace and Leg Sweep. What I would have done in this situation, or what you could have done in this situation, is you could have used Leg Sweep here, and then you could have rolled away back to your healer, and basically created distance between you and the mobs, and then you can further do so by using Ring of Peace. Since there are Harpooners in this pull, it's always a safe idea to place down a Transcendence if you need to. So if you happen to get gripped right back in, you can safely port back out immediately. In the future, just ease into this pull. There's no need to pull the Crusher right away or the mobs attacking the training dummies. You can just pull the pack at the end of the bridge, and then as you're comfortable, as you have Purified Chi stacks, generated, as you kind of get into the rhythm of combat, that's when you can start chain pulling in the Crusher and those additional mobs. I guess the last thing I really wanted to talk about in this run was the Harlan's trash in his room. Diffuse Magic can be used on the Oiled Blade debuff, so just make sure you're clearing it as soon as possible. Now, it's a unique circumstance because it does magical damage, so if you diffuse early as a form of mitigation, it will reduce the damage by 60%, but you'll have the debuff on you that prevents healing by 75%, which is pretty drastic. So if your healer isn't dispelling the debuff immediately, it's wise to save Diffuse Magic to remove the debuff so you can heal yourself. Now, what's unique is that Celestial Brew isn't affected by that incoming healing. Your Celestial Brew will still be fully effective, but your Gift of the Ox and your Celestial Fortune will not be as effective. So it's kind of on a as-need basis. You can either prevent a lot of the upfront damage with Diffuse Magic, or you can just remove the dot so you can actually like heal yourself. So really quickly, just summary of the run. Your rotation competency is actually really shown here. For the most part, you didn't mess up your rotation much, and your spell priority was on par. There were a few mistakes within your weapons of order window, but that happens even to the best of players. You really want to focus on maintaining Charred Passions and Rushing Jade Wind. While in combat, you want to see these both roughly between like 92 and 95%, if not higher. While you had high uptime, there were some instances where the aura buffs fell off. You want to strive to kind of perfect that. Of course, like I just mentioned, make sure you're using Dampen Harm like way more. It's one of your strongest defensives in your kit, and you've only used it 4 times during this freehold run. Black Axe Brew should also be utilized more, or feel free to run Bob and Weave instead. Black Axe Brew was only used 3 times throughout the entire run. At that rate, I would just drop the talent and take Bob and Weave since it's a fine counterpart. Again, if you're moving into a key where you're not as comfortable, or it's like a new level, let's just say you're like going into a 22 and you haven't really done that before, or 24, whatever it might be, Black Axe Brew could generally be a good little backup button as you explore new levels of Keystone. But if you're not using it, it's not really worth the point, right? And then some minor notes that I didn't really talk about in the run as much. I kind of briefly mentioned the Transcendence, but Brewmaster's movement and their ability to kite is really, really good. When you don't have cooldowns and you're taking a lot of damage, things like Transcendence, Ring of Peace, and of course like roll and whatnot can help you create a tremendous amount of distance between mobs that it's typically very difficult to close that gap. If you're ever in a position where you feel like you're taking a ton of damage, you don't have cooldowns, you want to create that distance. Kiting isn't a bad thing. You're going to lose some damage, of course, but stagger will never kill a Brewmaster Monk. If you're taking 1,000,000 damage per second from stagger, or whatever it might be, 150k damage per second from stagger, and you kite it and you're at 1 health, as long as you don't get hit by anything else, stagger will only ever bring you down to 1 health. Anyways, that's the run. My apologies for it taking so long. I wanted to get this video out much quicker, but again, busy with I'm starting a new job. I had some family stuff come up, and I just have a bunch of other projects that I'm currently working on. So thank you for being patient on this. I've already given you written notes. You actually already submitted another run, so I'll be doing a video about that fairly shortly. And thank you so much, Bruce Lee or Severo. Last little shout out. The link for this actual run is in the description below. If you're interested to see how Severo ran this dungeon, his route through here, where he uses cooldowns, go check it out. All right, I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.